Let me introduce myself. I'm Camille. I've been working at Apex Solutions for just over 3 years now, and if you asked me a week ago, I'd have told you it was the kind of place where people either thrived or disappeared into the beige walls of corporate monotony. It's not that the work is bad. In fact, I genuinely enjoy my role as a project coordinator. But there's something about this company, an undercurrent of tension, like everyone's walking on eggshells while trying to look busy enough to avoid being noticed. I've always prided myself on staying out of office drama. Sure, I've rolled my eyes at some of the ridiculous memos from management, but I never let it get personal. Or so I thought. That changed yesterday, when I made what seemed like an innocent comment during our weekly team meeting. A joke, really, and suddenly found myself sitting in HR with knots twisting up my stomach. It all started innocently enough. The meeting had dragged on longer than usual, thanks to Greg, our department head, droning endlessly about quarterly projections. He's one of those guys who talks in circles, using big words to mask the fact that he doesn't actually know what he's saying half the time. As his voice droned on, I leaned over to whisper something to Mia, the graphic designer 2 seats down. She's become a good friend since she joined 6 months ago, mostly because we both appreciate sarcasm and caffeine in equal measure. He makes more sense when you imagine him reading off cue cards. I muttered quietly, or at least I thought quietly, earning a stifled laugh from Mia. Unfortunately, Greg caught wind of it. His gaze snapped toward us, eyebrows raised expectantly. "Camille," he said sharply, "do you want to share your thoughts with the group?" The room went silent. All eyes turned to me, and I felt heat crawl up my neck. For a split second, I considered laughing it off or brushing it aside with some vague apology. Instead, without thinking, I blurted out, "Honestly? No, no one does." Mia choked back another laugh, covering her mouth with her hand. A few others shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, unsure whether they should laugh too or pretend nothing happened. Greg's face flushed red, but before he could respond, the meeting wrapped up. Everyone filed out quickly, avoiding eye contact with me as if I'd just lit a firecracker in the middle of the conference table. By late afternoon, though, things took a turn. My manager, Lisa, appeared at my desk looking unusually serious. She motioned for me to follow her, and within minutes, I was seated across from HR representative Rachel, whose expression alternated between stern professionalism and barely concealed annoyance. Rachel folded her hands neatly on the desk in front of her. "So, Camille," she began, her tone measured, "we need to discuss your behavior in today's meeting. Comments like the one you make can create a negative atmosphere and undermine authority." I stared at her, incredulous. Was she serious right now? Undermine authority? Over a joke? "It wasn't meant to be disrespectful," I replied, forcing myself to stay calm. "I was just making a lighthearted observation. You know Greg, he tends to go off on tangents sometimes." Rachel sighed heavily, glancing down at her notes as if searching for patience. Regardless of intent, such remarks are inappropriate in a professional setting. We need to ensure that all employees feel respected and valued here. Just as I opened my mouth to argue further, the door swung open unexpectedly. In walked none other than Daniel Hartman, CEO of Apex Solutions himself. My heart skipped a beat. What on earth was he doing here? Daniel was tall, impeccably dressed, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that commanded attention wherever he went. Rumor had it that he'd built Apex Solutions from the ground up after inheriting little more than a struggling startup from his father. To say he was intimidating would be an understatement, but also oddly compelling. There was something magnetic about him, even if most people were too afraid to admit it. "Sorry to interrupt," he said smoothly, closing the door behind him. His sharp blue eyes scanned the room before landing squarely on Rachel. "But we need to talk about something else entirely." For a moment, no one spoke. The air felt heavy, charged with unspoken tension. Then Rachel's face went white, literally pale, as if someone had drained every ounce of color from her skin. She stammered slightly, fumbling for words. "Mr. Hartman, this isn't exactly, What?" he cut in, raising an eyebrow. "Not a good time. Trust me, this can't wait." He pulled up a chair and sat down next to me, his presence dominating the small office. Up close, I could see faint lines around his eyes, evidence of long hours and high stakes. Yet despite the weight of whatever issue brought him here, there was a flicker of amusement in his expression, as if he found the whole situation vaguely entertaining. "So," he said, turning to me directly, "you must be Camille. Heard quite a bit about you recently." My stomach flipped. Had Greg already reported me to the CEO? Was this going to escalate into something worse? Before I could respond, Daniel continued, "Relax. This has nothing to do with whatever happened in that meeting. Although," he added with a wry smile, "I will say I'd love to hear your take on Greg sometime." Off the record, of course. Rachel looked like she might faint. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to regain control of the conversation. Mr. Hartman, perhaps we should address these matters separately. No, he interrupted firmly. This involves Camille too, whether you realize it yet or not. And just like that, everything shifted. Whatever illusion of normalcy I'd clung to vanished, replaced by a swirling mix of confusion, dread, and curiosity. Because deep down, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever Daniel Hartman wanted to discuss, it wasn't going to be simple or easy. Apex Solutions wasn't always this way. When I first started, it felt different, more alive, less suffocating. Back then, I believed in the mission, in the idea that we were building something meaningful. But somewhere along the line, things changed. The higher-ups became obsessed with profit margins and power plays, leaving employees like me caught in the crossfire. Still, I tried to rise above it. I poured myself into my projects, collaborated with colleagues like Mia, and kept my head down whenever possible. Until now, as Daniel settled into his seat, I couldn't help but notice how effortlessly he commanded the room. Even Rachel, who usually exuded an aura of authority, seemed diminished in his presence. It was unsettling and fascinating all at once. "All right," he said finally, leaning forward slightly. "Here's the deal. Something's come to light that requires immediate action. And unfortunately, it affects multiple levels of this organization, including yours, Camille." I swallowed hard, bracing myself for whatever bombshell he was about to drop. Little did I know, this moment would set off a chain reaction that would change everything, not just my career, but my life. Because as much as the story starts with corporate intrigue and power struggles, it's also about connection. About finding unexpected allies in the most unlikely places. And maybe, just maybe, discovering that love can bloom even in the darkest corners of a soulless corporation. But that part comes later. For now, I sat frozen, waiting for Daniel to explain why the CEO of Apex Solutions had walked into an HR meeting, and why Rachel looked like she'd seen a ghost. Daniel's piercing gaze lingered on me for a moment longer before he turned to Rachel. "Let's cut to the chase, shall we?" His tone was calm but firm, the kind that brooked no argument. "Camille, I'll need you to sign an NDA before we proceed further. This is sensitive information." Rachel fumbled through her desk drawer and pulled out a document with trembling hands, sliding it across the table toward me. My heart raced as I glanced at the non-disclosure agreement in front of me. What could possibly be so serious that the CEO himself had to intervene? And why involve me? "Sign it," Daniel said, his voice softening just enough to sound almost reassuring. "You're not in trouble. Quite the opposite. I think you might be one of the few people who can help us fix this mess." I hesitated, pen hovering over the paper. Something about his words didn't sit right. Help them? Fix what? But there was something else too. A flicker of sincerity behind his polished exterior, like he genuinely believed I could make a difference. Against my better judgment, I scribbled my name at the bottom. As soon as the ink dried, Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. For the first time since entering the room, he looked human. Vulnerable even. "All right," he began, his voice low and measured. "This stays between the three of us, no exceptions. A few days ago, internal audits flagged some irregularities in our financial records. At first glance, they appeared minor, accounting errors, perhaps even oversights. But when we dug deeper," he paused, his jaw tightening. "It turns out someone high up has been siphoning funds from the company. Millions of dollars, over the course of years." The air in the room seemed to grow heavier. Rachel stared at her hands, refusing to meet anyone's eyes, while I sat frozen, trying to process what I'd just heard. Corporate fraud. That wasn't uncommon. Sure, but here? In Apex Solutions? The thought felt surreal. "And the reason you're telling me this is?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's lips curved into a faint smile, though there was no humor in it. "Because you've already unknowingly stepped into the middle of it." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" He exchanged a glance with Rachel, who still looked pale and uneasy. "Greg," she murmured, almost reluctantly. "The person implicated in the investigation is Greg." My mind reeled. Greg, the same man whose endless meetings I'd mocked only hours earlier? The guy everyone joked about being clueless and overly verbose? How could someone like him pull off embezzling millions without anyone noticing? "Wait," I said, shaking my head. "If Greg's involved, why am I here? Why drag me into this?" Daniel leaned forward again, resting his elbows on his knees. "Because Greg noticed your comment in the meeting today, and he panicked. He thinks you know more than you let on." "That's insane." I shot back, my voice rising despite myself. "I don't know anything. I made a stupid joke, that's all." I believe you, Daniel said evenly. But Greg doesn't. And now he's scrambling. Which means you're at risk. At risk? The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Suddenly, the tension in the room made sense. The way Rachel had gone ghost white, the urgency in Daniel's demeanor. They weren't just worried about exposing Greg, they were worried about protecting me. Before I could fully grasp the implications, Daniel stood up abruptly. We need to move quickly. Greg isn't acting alone. He's got connections, both inside and outside the company. If he suspects you're on to him, he trailed off, letting the sentence hang unfinished. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely steady. For starters, Daniel replied, you'll need to lay low. Avoid drawing attention to yourself until we have concrete evidence against him. Second, he hesitated, glancing at Rachel once more. I want you to work directly with me. You'll assist in gathering intel, documenting any suspicious activity you observe. Think of it as corporate reconnaissance. I blinked, stunned. Me? Working with the CEO? It sounded absurd, like something out of a movie. Yet here I was, sitting in HR, being handed a role I hadn't asked for, and honestly wasn't sure I wanted. Why me? I asked softly. There are plenty of other people who could do this. People with more experience, better qualifications. Daniel studied me intently, his expression unreadable. Because you're smart, observant, and unlike most people around here, you're not afraid to speak your mind, even if it gets you into trouble. He gave me a small, wry smile. Besides, sometimes the best operatives are the ones no one expects. Over the next few days, my life became a blur of secrecy and paranoia. Every email I sent, every conversation I had, felt loaded with potential danger. I kept waiting for Greg to confront me, to accuse me of knowing too much, or worse, to retaliate. But instead, he acted completely normal, even going out of his way to be friendly during team meetings. It was unnerving, like watching a wolf wear a sheep's disguise. Meanwhile, Daniel and I began working together more closely than I ever imagined possible. He set up a secure line of communication where I could report anything unusual, and we met regularly in private to discuss updates. At first, these meetings felt stiff and formal, dominated by spreadsheets and strategy sessions. But gradually, something shifted. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Daniel invited me to join him for coffee at a quiet cafe near the office. I hesitated. It felt risky, stepping outside the confines of the building, but curiosity got the better of me. As we sat across from each other, sipping lattes, the conversation drifted away from work for the first time. We talked about books, music, places we'd traveled. I learned that beneath his polished CEO persona, Daniel was surprisingly down to earth. He admitted to hating public speaking, despite being excellent at it, and confessed that running Apex Solutions often left him feeling isolated. You must think I'm crazy, he said at one point, laughing self-consciously. Dragging you into this mess, expecting you to play detective. No crazier than agreeing to help, I countered, smiling despite myself. Honestly, part of me feels like I've stepped into a spy thriller. Except without the cool gadgets. He chuckled, leaning back in his chair. Well, if it makes you feel any better, you're definitely the star of the story. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope, not just for solving the mystery, but for surviving it. Being around Daniel was comforting in a strange way. Despite the chaos swirling around us, he had a way of making everything seem manageable. But as the days turned into weeks, the stakes grew higher. Greg's behavior became increasingly erratic, and rumors started circulating about layoffs and restructuring. Meanwhile, Daniel and I found ourselves relying on each other more and more, not just professionally, but personally. Late-night phone calls turned into heartfelt conversations. Shared frustrations morphed into shared laughter. And somewhere along the way, I realized I was starting to see Daniel not just as my boss, but as something more. Of course, neither of us acknowledged it, at least, not openly. There were rules, boundaries, reputations to consider. But every stolen glance, every lingering touch, told a different story. One that hinted at possibilities neither of us dared to name. And then came the night that changed everything. It was late, long after most employees had gone home. I'd stayed behind to finish compiling data for Daniel, poring over documents in a dimly lit conference room. When the door creaked open unexpectedly, I jumped, half expecting Greg to barge in wielding accusations or threats. Instead, it was Daniel. He looked exhausted. His tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. Still here? He asked softly, closing the door behind him. I couldn't leave, I admitted, gesturing to the piles of paperwork scattered across the table. Not until I figured this out. He nodded, pulling up a chair beside me. For a while, we worked in silence, side by side. But as the clock ticked past midnight, the weight of everything, the stress, the secrets, the simmering attraction between us, became too much to ignore. "Camille," Daniel said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. "There's something I need to tell you." I turned to face him, my pulse quickening. Whatever he was about to say, I knew it would change everything. And it did. Daniel's words hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. "Camille," he began again, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. "This whole situation, it's brought something into focus for me. Something I can't ignore anymore." My heart raced as I waited for him to continue, but instead of speaking, he reached out and took my hand. His touch was warm, grounding, like an anchor pulling me back from the whirlwind of uncertainty that had consumed my life for weeks. "I never planned for this," he admitted, his gaze locking onto mine. "You weren't supposed to become important to me, but somewhere along the way you did. And now I can't imagine going through all of this without you by my side." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, though whether they were from relief or disbelief I couldn't say. Here was Daniel Hartman, the CEO, the man who commanded boardrooms and inspired all with a single glance, sitting across from me, vulnerable and sincere. It was surreal, yet undeniably real. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What are we even doing? This is insane. We're risking everything for what?" "For us," he said firmly, squeezing my hand. "Because I believe we deserve a chance to figure this out. Together." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed deafening in the silence, but it was the kind of quiet that felt full, not empty. Finally, I nodded, a small smile breaking through the tension. "Okay," I murmured. "Let's do this. Whatever this is." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. With Daniel's guidance, I continued gathering evidence against Greg, piecing together the intricate web of deceit he'd woven over the years. It wasn't easy. There were close calls, moments when I thought we'd been discovered, but slowly, the truth came to light. When the board finally confronted Greg with the irrefutable proof of his crimes, he crumbled. In a desperate attempt to save himself, he tried to shift the blame onto others, including Rachel. But Daniel stepped in, defending her fiercely and ensuring she wasn't scapegoated for Greg's actions. By the time it was over, Greg was gone, arrested and stripped of his position, while Rachel found herself promoted to interim department head, a role she embraced with quiet determination. As for Daniel and me, our relationship blossomed in the aftermath. Once the dust settled, he made it clear to everyone that he intended to pursue something real with me, regardless of company policy or public opinion. At first, there were whispers, raised eyebrows, and a few disapproving glances. But Daniel handled it all with grace and transparency, making it known that while he valued his role as CEO, he valued me more. We decided to take things slow, mindful of the challenges ahead. Our late-night conversations turned into weekend getaways. Stolen moments became cherished memories. Daniel introduced me to his family, a close-knit group who welcomed me with open arms, and I showed him parts of my world he'd never experienced before, like cozy bookstores and hidden cafes tucked away in quiet neighborhoods. One evening, months after the scandal had faded into the background, Daniel surprised me with dinner on the rooftop of Apex Solutions headquarters. The city stretched out below us, glittering under a canopy of stars. He handed me a glass of champagne, his expression unreadable but tinged with excitement. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. I clinked mine against his, smiling. "And happy endings."